Huh.
Hello and welcome to Rocket PC Gaming. My name is Rocket, if you guys have not figured that out already. And my streamers have been asking for this for a while. This is going to be an absolute beginner's guide to career mode in Kerbal Space Program. So I'm going to assume that you are brand new to Kerbal Space Program, and this is who it's aimed at. So if you are an expert, this may not exactly be what you're looking for. But if you're not, and you're brand new to KSP, this is just for you. So we're going to get started here. Now, one thing I have to recommend is that if you have not played through the in-game tutorials, I highly recommend it, as this is not necessarily a game that you can just kind of jump in and wing it and figure it out. Unless you're used to understanding how orbital mechanics work, you know, at a basic level, it's going to be very difficult to just jump in and go, which is one of the big hangups I think are big mistakes that I see a lot of people make when they're getting into Kerbal Space Program. Anyway, so to get started here, what we're going to do is we're going to click on Start Game. We're going to start a new game. It is going to be career, and of course I have to pick my flag. By the way, you can make your own flag, by the way, if you're good at any type of artwork, or you can even do it in Paint. It needs to be a PNG file, and it is 256 pixels by 160 is the size. Anyway, we now have our flag. This is our YouTube career tutorial. We are in career mode here. Now, if you go in here to the difficulty options, there's a whole bunch of different options in here that you can do. You know, make it easy, moderate, hard. The easy, moderate, normal, moderate, hard are not like your typical easy, moderate, hard. Basically, all it does is going to reduce the amount of rewards that you get for everything, reduce your starting funding. It just means that it takes longer to do things, not really that it makes them more difficult. I think the only thing that may make it a little bit more difficult is if you turn off missing crews respawn, which is what we're going to do. Is this what it means is if we accidentally, and of course it's by accident, kill a Kerbal, they will not respawn. So which means that we will have to replace them. Alright, so that is the only thing that we're going to change. If you're new to KSP, I would just leave it at its default settings under normal. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and hit accept, and let's get started. And of course you're greeted by Gene Kerman, who says, "Nice to meet you. I'm Gene Kerman, Flight Director and your guide for this quick introduction. This is the Space Center. From here you can manage all aspects of the space program. Feel free to have a look around. Hold the right mouse button to move, or use the arrow keys." So you can kind of rotate it around by holding down the right mouse button. And you can also right click your different facilities to give a little bit more information about where the level they're at. And then of course the option to upgrade, which we can't do yet because we don't have enough funds. Alright, Gene, thank you so much for the introduction. Alright, so here is the general layout of Kerbal Space Center from here on out, referred to as the KSC. So one of the most important buildings to get started with is this one, Mission Control. This is where you're going to get all your contracts from. Alright, so next we have the spaceplane hangar. But this is where you're going to be building all of your aircraft. Anything that flies in the atmosphere, including all the way up into space planes, this is where you're going to build it. And of course you have the runway, which has not yet been upgraded, so it's just a really bumpy dirt runway. Alright, the launch pad over here. This is where you're going to be launching all of your rockets from, for the most part. You can't actually launch them from the runway, but we'll get to that at some future video most likely. And this is the Vehicle Assembly Building, or VAB. This is where you're going to be constructing all of your rockets. Now the big difference between these two buildings is that this one is primarily built for making things that are horizontal, and this one's built or used for building things that are vertical. Alright, next we have the tracking station. And this is where it's going to we can look at all the different flights that we have in progress. Because maybe we have to do a satellite adjustment, or we have probes on the way to Duna, we have some on the way to Joule, which are different planets in the Kerbal space system. This will allow us to be able to see where everything's at once. All right, then we have the astronaut complex. And the astronaut complex is where we're going to be doing the majority of our recruiting of new Kerbals. And obviously you can upgrade and do some different things. Then we have the flagpole, which you can actually change your flag from here also if you wish to. We have the administration building, which I'm not really going to cover too much on. There's a couple of different things that you can do to kind of min-max the amount of science versus funding that you're earning from here. And then we have the all-important research and development. So the career game is driven by two things. One is funds, and those you get through contracts from Mission Control. And we'll go more into that here in a moment. And then the next is science. Science is going to dictate what technologies you unlock and how far you can go into the or how much more you can do with what you have. So for starters, I always recommend everybody go straight to Mission Control. Okay, so here's Gene Kerman again, welcoming us in. And we have the ability to accept up to a maximum of 2 contracts at this time. We can get more once we upgrade the building later. But for the time being, we're just going to grab 2. The 2 that I recommend grabbing is gather scientific data from Kerbal. We're going to accept this. And then we're going to launch our first vessel, and we're going to accept that. Now the reason I say take those 2 first over these 2 is because if you grab one of these, or grab these 2 first, you're basically going to be canceling out the other 2 because you would have already accomplished it. So to maximize getting started, those are the 2 I recommend. Are they gather scientific data from Kerbal and launch our first vessel. And here you can see the available contracts, here are the active contracts, and then archives are the ones we've already completed, failed, or canceled upon. Okay, so we've maxed out on contracts. We're going to leave here. We're going to go to our vehicle assembly building. And here we have Werner von Kerman, who is introducing us a little bit more about what you can do in this building. So thanks, Werner. Thanks for the introduction. We got it. Okay, now there's a couple of components that every rocket must have. Number 1 is it must have some type of command pod, right? So the only one we have available right now is the Mark 1, the MK1, which is the MK is the abbreviation for Mark. So we're going to grab that. Later on we'll have different probe command pods, but there always must be something that's going to control the rocket. And sometimes you may end up building rockets in the future that will have multiple command pods. Alright, so to get started here, all we're going to do is grab the Mark 1 command pod. We're going to come down here to Science. You can see all the different tabs. These are basically filters for the different types of parts that you have available. And you can look through these to see what you have. You won't have these 2, and that's okay. This is from a mod that I have installed, which is called Kerbal Engineer Redux. This mod is not required to play the game. I have it installed on this just to be able to illustrate a few things and kind of do some of the math for me, which also makes it easier in explaining. But anyway, what we're going to grab here is the mystery goo. Don't ask me what mystery goo is. It's a mystery. So we're going to grab that, and we are going to slap that on the side here, and we're going to hit X. So when we hit X, right, we're cycling through the symmetry modes down here, or the symmetry count, I guess I should say. And you can also do that with X will increase, and then Shift X will decrease. When you're building a rocket, you want everything in balance. If there's not an offsetting mass when you launch something, the rocket is going to spin in that direction. Alright, so now we're going to go to Utility. We're going to grab a parachute. We're going to slap this guy on here. And we're going to change the right-click the parachute, and we're going to change the pressure to about 0.7. So what this means is that when we arm the parachute, right, when we activate it through staging, the parachute will not deploy until it falls into the thick enough atmosphere that is considered a pressure of 0.7. 0.1 is sea level, right? So 0.7 is about 70% of pressure at sea level. Now that pressure will work for pretty much any terrain type, with the exception of some of the upper highlands and mountainous terrain. But it'll work for water, grasslands, and some areas of the highlands and the deserts. Okay, so we now have our capsule. So we're going to go here to structural, or actually we're going to go to engines, sorry. We're going to grab the flea. So now we have the flea on here. Alright, so over here on the bottom right, this is our staging area, right? This is going to be, it'll go all the way up here depending on how many different things you have attached to the rocket here. But what we're going to do is we're going to click the plus sign because we need to separate this, because right now if we were to activate this, the rocket engine, our solid rocket booster, and our parachute would act together, which would be kind of counterproductive. So we're going to just grab the rocket engine and just drag it down to the other one, right? And the way the staging activation works is once we got to the launch pad, we're going to use spacebar to activate each sequential stage. So it always goes from the bottom to the top. Alright, so now we have our first rocket. Now, there's a couple of things that are going on here that we're going to want to change. First is that if we right click the rocket here, you're going to see that we have a thrust limiter option and then the amount of fuel that this engine actually has. So on a solid rocket booster, what we're going to do is we're going to reduce this down, because at its current pace, as you can see here from the Kerbal Engineer mod that I have installed, we have a thrust to weight on the pad of 6.5.4. That means we're going to launch at 6.5 times the force of gravity, which is a bit extreme, right? It means the rocket's going to burn really, really hard, really, really fast, and it's going to be very difficult to control. So what we're going to do is we're going to thrust limit this back down to about 1.5, in the neighborhood of. You really don't want to go above 1.6 in thrust to weight, and you can look up Kozlowski's rocket equation for the math behind how to figure out what your delta V is. And delta V literally means change in velocity. So at launch, we basically have zero velocity in relation to the surface. So the amount of change that we're going to have is going to be 732 meters per second. And as you can see by thrust limiting this, it doesn't change the amount of delta V. So it doesn't matter how fast we burn or not how fast we burn. We still only have the same amount of potential change in velocity. Okay, so now we're not going to reduce the amount of fuel. We're going to let it go for a full burn. And we're going to go to the crew tab here. So we have build, which shows us all the different parts. Then we have crew up here. And we have Jebediah Kerman. He is our main pilot. So with that, we are ready to launch. So we're going to go ahead and rename our rocket here. And we're going to just name it First Rocket. And we're going to come over here and hit save. Then we're going to hit this green button here for launch. And we're going to go out to the launch pad. But we're not going to go anywhere just yet. Alright, so remember what I said, the two primary things about a career mission are funds, which you earn through completing contracts, and then science, which you use to be able to unlock more stuff in the science and in research and development, to be able to do more with what you have, and to unlock new parts. So we're going to start by right-clicking on the capsule here, and we're going to click Crew Report. Right, so this is going to give us 1.5 science. So we're going to keep this experiment. We're going to observe one of the mystery goos. Again, it's a right-click menus for these, and that gives us 3 science. The goo doesn't seem to be doing much right now. Of course not. It's just sitting there, and we're going to keep that experiment. Okay, so next we're going to come down here over to the right here, and we're going to click on this little button here that says EVA. EVA means extra vehicular activity. So we're going to click on that, and Mr. Jebediah is going to hop out. Now your guy might come out with his spacesuit on. That's okay. It's from a different mod that I have installed. It's not required, but this is what your guy's going to look like when he pops out here. We're going to right click on him, and we're going to say EVA report, right? So it's going to give us an EVA report of flying over Kerbal shores. And we're going to go ahead and keep this experiment. Now we're going to right click the capsule again, and we're going to take our data, right? So we're taking that crew report that was in there, right? And now we're going to store it. So basically what we're doing is we're taking the crew report out of the computer and then putting it into storage. So now we're going to hit B to reboard. And now we're almost ready to launch. So again, before we go, we want to double check the staging, and if you just hover the mouse over the icon, it will highlight it to show you where it's at in its staging. So the rule with staging is that you want to check, double check, and recheck. Alright, so next we're going to hit the T key, and you're going to see this line up for toggle SAS is what the T key does. SAS is still a stability assistance system. What that means is that our little green Kerbal here, Jebediah, is going to help us with keeping the rocket steady in flight. And only a pilot is able to activate SAS, or a more advanced probe core, which we haven't unlocked yet, so I'll get into that later. But again, in the beginning, you want to have a pilot on board. If we had a scientist or an engineer, which were options, you would not be able to do this, and you would have to fly the rocket manually, which can be a little bit more difficult, especially if you're brand new to the game. So what we're going to do is there's no need to throttle up because it's a solid rocket booster. Solid rocket booster is just going to burn at whatever we have it set at. And that's one of the reasons why we set it inside of the VAB. So without further ado, 3, 2, 1, launching. Alright, so as soon as we lift off here, we're going to right click on the capsule, and now we're going to take another crew report, because now we're flying. So that's another 3.5 science. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to observe the other mystery goo that we put on board, and that's now going to give us 7 science. Now, to make sure that we don't come back down and smack the launch pad, is we're going to very slowly tip our rocket to the right. This way it's going to kind of push us out this direction. But we don't want to go too far with it. Alright, as you can see, our rocket engine has now burnt out. So now at this point, all we can do is just kind of coast. Now some of these buttons you're going to see over here, this is going to show you what you've completed in contracts. This gas can here, we're going to click it to lock it open. You just left click it and it'll stay locked open. Is our resource panel. As you can see, we have 49.6 electric charge remaining of 50. We have 10 monopropellant, which we're not ever going to use at this stage. And from the future, you'll see me deleting this out of the capsule every time we go to launch it. And then as you can see, our solid fuel, which we've already used up. Alright, and up here, this is our altitude in meters, right? As you can see, we're descending. This gauge here is our rate of descent, or our descent, which you can see as we're going faster and faster and faster. So now we're going to go ahead and hit spacebar to deploy our parachute. We've armed it, and once we get to the right pressure, there it goes. It'll deploy in drogue mode. And then when we reach the right altitude, it'll fully deploy and slow our rate of descent. As you'll see here, our rate of descent is going to come down. Now on the next part on this bar here, is you're going to see different colors of blue going all the way up into black. What this represents is the different layers of atmosphere here on Kerbal. The light blue here is the thickest portion. The blue is the next thickest portion, or next thinner portion, I guess I should say. The even darker blue, it gets even thinner to black to where there's almost no atmosphere whatsoever, and then once you're above that, you're in space. So we're just going to gently coast down here to the ground. And that's it. That is our first rocket launch we have completed. So what we're going to do now is if we go up here to above our information bar here that shows our altitude, we now have an option of recover vessel or return to the Space Center. If we return to the Space Center, that's going to leave Mr. Jebediah and the rocket and all the science he collected here. So since this mission is over, we're going to go ahead and select recover vessel. At some point in the future, you may, when you're landing on the moon or putting a satellite into orbit, you're not going to want to recover the vessel because you want to leave it where it's at. So we're going to go ahead and recover this since we are mission complete. So now we're going to get a little synopsis review of our mission. So we're going to, here we have a science summary of all the science that we've gathered, and as you can see, we collected 25.6 science. Alright, next, if we jump over here to parts, which is also the same thing, if you just click the next button, it'll do the same thing. You can see, because we landed close enough to the KSC, 2.2 kilometers away, that we have recovered 97.9% of the value of the rocket, minus the fuel expenditure. Right, so we recollected 2680 in funds. So click next, and we can see Jebediah, he gained 1 experience point. Not enough yet for a star, but we have gained some experience. Alright, and we've also gained 20 reputation. Reputation will also help with getting different types of contracts. So we're going to go ahead and click on Done. So down over here, you can see these are the same same tools that were up here on the right when we were in flight. So we're going to come down here and go ahead and just select one of these. These are our world first milestones. These are like bonuses for the first time you complete certain things in Kerbal Space Program. So as you can see, we actually earned some funds by being the first to do some of these. So we're going to go ahead and clear that. And next, we completed a contract for launch our first vessel. So that gave us 1 science on its own, and then it also gave us 1 reputation. So we can clear that contract. And then we also completed our other contract of gather scientific data from Kerbal. So it's another 7,600 in funds, 1 science, and 3 reputation. So we can clear that contract. So now, as you can see in our science meter here, we now have 34.6 science to spend in our R&D building. And this graph here, this is our reputation, right? As I said, the higher reputation you have, the more lucrative missions that our contracts you'll be able to recover. And then, of course, our total funds that we've earned thus far. So what we're doing now is we're going to go here to research and development. As you can see, you start with tier 0, right? This is tier 0. These are the parts that you start with. And so we have 34.6 science to spend. So we're going to click on Engineering 101. And this is going to cost us 5 science to unlock a Science Junior, which gives us more, which is another experiment to give us even more science, a Commutatron 16, and a decoupler. And we'll go more into what decouplers are as we start to build more advanced rockets. So we're going to go ahead and research this and spend 5 science. We still have 29.6 science to spend. So now we're going to go over here to our other tier 1 node of basic rocketry, which is going to give us our first liquid fueled engine. And we'll discuss in a moment here, or in a future video, of the difference between a liquid fueled engine and a solid rocket booster, which obviously uses solid fuel. We also get a larger solid fuel booster here, the Hammer, which is basically twice the size of the Flea, the one that we used earlier on our mission. And then we have our smallest fuel tank, which is the FLT 100, which essentially means it holds 100 units of fuel. So as you can see, it holds 45 units of liquid fuel and 55 units of oxidizer for a total of 100 units. So we're going to go ahead and research that. Now we still have 24.6 science to spend. So as we start to branch out here, you can see that there's a bunch of different nodes, and you can click on these to see what they are, what they have, what parts they unlock, and how much science is going to cost to unlock them. Now, there's a few things that you're going to want to unlock just from your own personal taste. There is no right or wrong way to go about it. A lot of people prefer to grab everything that's going to give them more science faster, so they can unlock more things quicker, which is perfectly fine. Some people will want to prefer aviation over rocketry, and that is also fine. So there is no correct or incorrect way to unlock any of these nodes. Just note that in order to unlock some of them, you must have the previous node. So for example, we have Engineering 101, so it makes survivability available to us as long as we have the right amount of science. But even if we had 45 science, we could not unlock basic science down here to unlock these parts, as we don't have this one unlocked yet. So we're going to go ahead and click on Basic Survivability. And you can see here, this is going to give us a heat shield, which is going to be important, right? We have some radiators, which are not so important yet. Some very, very basic landing gears, our landing struts, drogue chutes, which are smaller than normal chutes, but you're able to open them at higher altitudes and higher velocities. And we'll get more into that into a future video. Then we have radial mount parachutes, which allow us to be able to recover more of our rocket, and if we have heavier things still attached to our capsule. And then we have a service bay, which is kind of like a miniature cargo bay type thing. So this is 15 science. So we're going to go ahead and grab this. So now it leaves us with 9.6 science to leave in the bank. And we're going to go ahead and leave the facility. And that completes our first 2 contracts. So if we go back to mission control, you'll see we do not have any active contracts. So now we can look into our next contracts, which we're going to grab Escape the Atmosphere, and then we're going to grab Orbit Kerbal. Now there's other missions here you can on your own game. You can read through them. Some things are easier to do than others. Anything that it says landed or at the launch site is basically free funds. They're very easy to complete, and as we come across those, I'll demonstrate what I mean by that. There's other ones here that are take crew reports, do different over different areas of Kerbal. We have not unlocked any aviation components yet, so we do not have the ability to build any aircraft. All we can do is build basic rockets, and trying to pilot a basic rocket into some of these areas, given the altitude requirements, are a little bit more difficult. So we're going to leave these alone for the time being. And I believe that is going to complete part 1 of this tutorial series. So I hope to see you again in my next video. If you like this video, please hit that like button. If you like all of my videos, or if you want to see more, hit that subscribe button, and then also check out my Twitch channel, which you'll see the link up below. It's just Twitch, Rocket PC Gaming, and I shall talk to you guys again soon. Thank you.